She's history's most prolific female serial killer, a noblewoman who supposedly bathed in the blood of 600 virgins to stay young. It's a tale that's seeped into our collective consciousness, a gruesome legend that has inspired countless horror stories, heavy metal songs, and even video game villains. But what if the legend of the Blood Countess is just that? A legend. What if Elizabeth Bathory wasn't a monster born of pure evil, but a convenient scapegoat for kings and nobles who coveted her vast wealth, her strategic lands, and, ultimately, her removal from the political chessboard? Today, we're going way past the campfire tale. We're going to peel back the layers of myth and sensationalism to ask the really uncomfortable questions. Was the Countess a sadistic killer who delighted in unimaginable cruelty, or was she the richest political prisoner of her age, systematically dismantled by those who stood to gain the most from her downfall? It's a historical whodunit with far-reaching implications, a story that forces us to question how history gets written, especially when powerful women are involved. So, grab a seat, settle in, and if you're into historical mysteries that challenge everything you thought you knew, hit that like button. Let's dive deep into the shadowy world of Elizabeth Bathory and uncover the truth. Chapter 1. The Legend You Think You Know. When most people hear the name Elizabeth Bathory, a very specific image probably flashes through their minds. A pale, aristocratic woman, perhaps with a sinister smile, lounging in a tub filled with scarlet liquid, while terrified teenage girls scream in the background. It's a chilling, unforgettable image, right? This is the version of history that has been so thoroughly ingrained that even the Guinness World Records once crowned her the most prolific female murderer, pegging her body count at a staggering 650 victims. The popular narrative usually paints a picture like this. Bathory, a Hungarian countess, lures young peasant girls to her remote Chaktic castle, deep in the Carpathian Mountains. Once there, she subjects them to unspeakable tortures, seemingly for her own amusement. Then, one day, she supposedly notices that a splash of a servant's blood on her skin makes that spot look younger. Eureka! A ghastly fountain of youth is discovered, and she begins bathing in the blood of virgins nightly, convinced it will preserve her beauty and youth forever. Creepy! Absolutely. It's the stuff of nightmares, perfectly crafted for a horror movie. But here's where the historical record starts to get a little, well, bloody messy. The earliest printed mention of this literal bloodbath doesn't actually show up until 1729. That's more than a century after her death in 1614. Think about that for a second. Over 100 years passed before this pivotal, most sensational detail of her legend ever made it into print. And what about the 300-plus witness statements collected during the actual 1610 investigation into her alleged crimes? Not one of them, not a single one, describes seeing the Countess in a crimson jacuzzi. You won't find a single account where someone testifies, "Yup, walked into her private chambers and there she was, splashing around in a tub of blood." So, if the contemporary evidence doesn't back it up, how did this lurid detail become the cornerstone of her legend? Simple. It's grotesquely memorable. It taps into primal fears and fascinations with youth, beauty, and forbidden rituals. It's a sensational hook that sells stories, then and now. The idea spread because it's so shocking and unforgettable, not because it's documented fact. Still, the number 650 stuck, and so did the chilling nickname Blood Countess, launching 1,000 tales. This single, unsubstantiated image has fueled everything from classic vampire novels and intense heavy metal lyrics to modern video game villains like Lady Dimitrescu in Resident Evil. It's become a cultural touchstone, a shorthand for ultimate female evil. But if the bloodbathing is a later fabrication, a sensationalist flourish added by writers long after the fact, then how did a powerful, highly educated noblewoman from one of Europe's most influential families become Europe's original boogie woman, the poster child for female depravity? The answer, as it often is in history, is far more complex and perhaps far more human. It's a story woven with threads of power, money, gender, and desperate political maneuvering. Chapter 2. Who was she really? Let's rewind the clock and get to know the woman behind the monster. Elizabeth Bathory was born in 1560 into one of Hungary's most powerful and wealthiest families. We're talking about connections that would make a modern-day political dynasty blush. Think Sopranos-level influence, but without the tracksuits and with far more castles. Her family, the House of Bathory, was Protestant nobility that controlled vast swathes of land in the Kingdom of Hungary, a region that now includes parts of modern-day Slovakia. Her lineage was truly staggering. Her uncle, Stephen Bathory, wasn't just some noble. He was the Prince of Transylvania and later became the King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania. Another relative was a cardinal. These weren't minor players. These were the movers and shakers of Central European politics. Elizabeth herself grew up surrounded by immense privilege and power, spending her childhood at Exeter Castle, and she wasn't just a pretty face with a powerful name. Elizabeth Bathory was incredibly well educated, a rarity for many women of her era, even those in the nobility. She reportedly spoke 4 languages fluently: Latin, German, Hungarian, and Slovak, and some sources even suggest she knew Greek. She was also a shrewd administrator, managing several sprawling estates and overseeing vast financial holdings. Crucially, and again, quite rare for the late 16th century, she could sign her own name on legal documents, a testament to her literacy and active involvement in her affairs. At the tender age of 15 in 1575, she was married to Count Ferenc Nadasdy. He was 19. Ferenc was a formidable figure in his own right, a warrior nicknamed the Black Bey for his brutal fighting tactics against the Ottoman Turks, which included a rather unpleasant habit of impaling Turkish prisoners. Romantic, right? Some accounts even suggest he might have schooled her in techniques of torture during their time together, or that he built a torture chamber to her specifications. Whether this is true or a later embellishment, it certainly paints a picture of a household where cruelty wasn't entirely foreign. Together, Elizabeth and Ferenc controlled so much land, so many castles, and so many resources that the king himself literally owed them money. Their influence was undeniable. They had 5 children, though 2 died in infancy. While Ferenc was often away fighting the Ottoman Wars, which were a constant drain on Hungary's resources and created immense instability, Elizabeth was left in charge of their extensive estates. This meant she wasn't just a figurehead. She was actively managing vast wealth and hundreds, if not thousands, of people. Then, tragedy struck, or perhaps opportunity knocked, depending on your perspective. Ferenc Nadasdy died in 1604 at the age of 48, after a prolonged illness that left him permanently disabled. With his passing, Elizabeth Bathory, at 44 years old, became one of the richest widows in all of Central Europe. She wasn't just wealthy, she was independently wealthy, with control over her own destiny and her children's inheritance. And that, my friends, made a lot of powerful men very, very nervous. A lone woman, holding sway over 17 castles, controlling Slovakia's most profitable salt mine, and collecting taxes on a huge stretch of the Var River. That just wasn't the Renaissance norm. In early modern Europe, women, especially powerful ones, were often viewed with suspicion. Society expected women to be subservient, to be managed by men. Elizabeth Bathory defied that expectation in every way. So, when rumors, dark, whispered rumors, started swirling that girls were disappearing on her estates, you can bet that plenty of powerful people were not only ready to believe the worst, but actively eager to exploit it. Her wealth and independent status made her a target, a dangerous anomaly in a patriarchal world. Her gender, ironically, became both her source of power and her ultimate vulnerability. Chapter 3: The Investigation Nobody Expected. The whispers about Elizabeth Bathory's alleged cruelties had been circulating for years, particularly after her husband's death in 1604. At first, these rumors, primarily concerning peasant girls, were largely ignored by the authorities. After all, in the social hierarchy of the time, the lives of commoners often held little value to the nobility. Mistreatment of servants, though perhaps not to the extreme degree alleged against Bathory, was unfortunately not uncommon among the aristocracy. However, the nature of the accusations began to shift. By 1609, the whispers turned into frantic, alarming letters sent by Lutheran ministers and local nobles to King Matthias II. The key difference now? The allegations suggested that the victims were no longer just peasant girls, but also daughters of lesser nobility who had been sent to Bathory's castle for education and courtly training. This was a game changer. Mistreating the peasantry was one thing. Harming the daughters of the gentry was an insult to the entire social order and a direct threat to the power structure. King Matthias II was facing his own set of colossal problems. He was knee-deep in expensive, exhausting wars against the Ottoman Empire, a conflict that had been draining the Hungarian treasury for decades. And guess what? The king, perpetually short on funds, owed Elizabeth Bathory a fortune, a truly massive sum, estimated to be around 80,000 gold pieces. This wasn't just pocket change, it was a significant portion of his kingdom's finances. Repaying such a debt would have been a huge burden, perhaps even impossible given his wartime expenditures. Now, here's where the plot thickens with a heavy dose of political convenience. Conveniently, if Elizabeth Bathory were convicted of witchcraft and murder, her vast lands and immense wealth would revert to the crown. The king's debt? Poof, gone. It's almost too perfect, isn't it? Enter György Thurzo. He was the Count Palatine of Hungary, a powerful figure equivalent to a prime minister or viceroy, and a trusted ally of King Matthias. Thurzo was assigned by Matthias to investigate the claims against Bathory in 1610. But Thurzo wasn't just an impartial prosecutor. He was also a man with significant political ambitions and personal connections that stood to benefit from Bathory's downfall. He was, in many ways, part prosecutor, part spin doctor, part opportunistic land grabber. Thurzo rolled into Countess castle in December 1610, not with a warrant for questioning, but with soldiers, a priest, and what amounted to a pre-written death warrant for Elizabeth's servants. The official story claims that upon entering, they found one girl dead and another dying, along with other mutilated dead, dying, and imprisoned girls. However, some historians argue that this physical evidence was exaggerated or misinterpreted, suggesting that Thurzo might have presented sick or wounded patients as Bathory's victims to bolster his case. Within weeks, Thurzo and his notaries had collected over 300 witness statements. These testimonies painted a horrifying picture of cruelty. Some claimed Elizabeth stabbed needles under fingernails. Others said she smeared girls with honey and left them for ants. We'll get into the gruesome details of these accusations later. The Countess herself was placed under house arrest immediately. But here's a crucial detail. Elizabeth Bathory was never granted a public trial. Not ever. Why not? Because Hungarian law at the time specifically barred trying nobles in the king's courts, especially for crimes that would bring scandal upon their powerful families. A public trial, with its potential for sensationalism and the public disgrace of a prominent family, was deemed too damaging to the nobility as a whole. Instead, Parliament quietly passed a bill that effectively cancelled the royal debt and placed Elizabeth's extensive estates under Thurzo's management. Funny how that works, isn't it? The king got out of debt, Thurzo gained control of valuable properties, and a powerful, independently wealthy woman was neutralized without the messy inconvenience of a public, potentially embarrassing trial. It certainly looks less like blind justice and more like a meticulously orchestrated political maneuver. Chapter 4. Show Trial of the Servants. While Elizabeth Bathory herself was spared the indignity of a public trial, her alleged accomplices were not so lucky. In January 1611, just weeks after Bathory's arrest, 4 of her servants were dragged to a mining town called Bitsi for a spectacle trial. These were Ilona Jo, Dorothea Sentes, and Janos Uivari, along with a 4th manservant whose fate was slightly different. The proceedings were a brutal affair, designed not for justice, but for public demonstration, and to extract confessions that would incriminate the Countess. The 3 female servants and 1 male servant were subjected to extreme torture before and during the trial. Imagine the horror. Their fingers were torn off with hot pincers, and they were ultimately burned alive. The manservant, for his part, managed to escape the fiery fate, receiving a life sentence because he turned state's evidence, confessing under duress. Their confessions, extracted under such unimaginable pain, claimed the Countess ordered everything. They detailed horrific acts, some of which truly make your skin crawl. According to these testimonies, Bathory and her servants engaged in a wide array of torture methods: needles and pins. Driving needles or pins under fingernails was a frequently cited torment. Ice baths. Victims were stripped naked and forced into ice baths during the coldest months of the year, left to freeze to death. Honey and insects. In warmer months, girls were allegedly smeared with honey and left outside, exposed to swarms of biting insects. Beatings and mutilation. Witnesses described severe beatings with clubs, whipping with stinging nettles, and even more gruesome acts like cutting off noses or lips, burning flesh, and biting off chunks of skin from breasts and faces. Some even claimed she used scissors to mutilate her victims, cutting off hands or genitals, or slicing the skin between their fingers. Starvation. Some victims were simply starved to death. Gruesome, yes, absolutely. These accounts paint a picture of truly depraved cruelty. But here's the kicker. Even these confessions, obtained under the most brutal forms of torture, never mention blood bathing. Not once did any of the tortured servants corroborate the sensational story that would later define Elizabeth Bathory. They described beatings, ice water dunking, branding, and mutilation, but a literal bloodbath? That was a far cry from the tales they told. The court records also reveal significant inconsistencies. Many witnesses contradicted each other on basic facts like dates, names, and the exact methods of torture. Modern historians now look at these trials with immense skepticism, wondering how much of the testimony was coached, or how many people simply repeated village gossip and hearsay under the immense pressure and pain of torture themselves, desperate to make the torment stop. The reliability of any confession extracted under torture is, by definition, highly questionable. People will say anything to stop the pain. It's crucial to remember that in this era, torture was a common, legally sanctioned method for obtaining confessions, which were often considered necessary for a conviction. But it also means that the confessions of Bathory's servants are inherently unreliable as evidence of her guilt, let alone the specific crime she was accused of. Their suffering was undeniable, but whether their words truly reflected Bathory's actions, or merely what their torturers wanted to hear, remains a haunting question. Chapter 5. The Conspiracy Angle. Let's lay out the math, because sometimes following the money trail and the power dynamics reveals a much clearer picture than sensationalized legends. Elizabeth Bathory was not just wealthy, she was an economic and political powerhouse in 17th century Hungary. Consider her holdings. She owned 17 castles. Think about the strategic importance and the sheer wealth represented by these strongholds. She controlled Slovakia's most profitable salt mine. Salt was like gold in early modern Europe, essential for preserving food and a massive source of revenue. She held the rights to collect taxes on a huge stretch of the Vach River, a vital trade route. And, oh yeah, there was that massive IOU from King Matthias II, a debt of around 80,000 gold pieces that the king desperately needed to clear, especially with his ongoing wars against the Ottomans. After her husband, Ferenc Nadasdy, died in 1604, Elizabeth became the legal guardian of her children. This meant that all that immense wealth and influence remained under her direct control and signature. In a society where women were largely expected to be subservient, this level of independent power was not just unusual. It was, for many, deeply unsettling and threatening. King Matthias, as we've established, was flat broke from fighting the Ottomans. He needed funds to pay his mercenaries and maintain his army. The thought of cancelling a huge debt while simultaneously acquiring vast, revenue-generating lands must have been incredibly appealing. But it wasn't just Matthias. Elizabeth's own cousin, Gabor Bathory, was also running a rival principality in Transylvania, and he had ambitions for the Hungarian throne. The Bathory family, in general, was a powerful force that often challenged Habsburg rule, and Elizabeth's fortresses could have aided Garba's army. Removing Elizabeth served multiple purposes. It would wipe out the royal debt, weaken a significant political rival, and potentially consolidate power for the crown or for ambitious individuals like György Thurzo, who himself had political aspirations that would benefit from disgracing the Bathory family. All you needed was a splash of scandal. And Renaissance Europe, unfortunately, had a tried-and-true recipe for ruining powerful, independent women. Accuse them of witchcraft or monstrous deeds, torture their servants until they confess to anything, and then print lurid pamphlets to spread the sensational story far and wide. Sound familiar? It's a playbook that has been used throughout history to discredit and disempower women who step outside prescribed societal roles. And it worked like a charm. Her lands were eventually chopped up and redistributed among other noble families. Her family's direct influence collapsed. And that enormous royal debt, it vanished into thin air. Call it cynical, but that doesn't look like blind justice operating purely on evidence. It looks an awful lot like a hostile takeover with extra bloody steps, disguised as a moral crusade. The political and financial incentives were simply too enormous to ignore. The question isn't if there were political motivations, but rather how much they shaped the entire narrative and outcome of Elizabeth Bathory's fate. Chapter 6. Life in a bricked-up castle. Following the trial of her servants in January 1611, Elizabeth Bathory was condemned to perpetual imprisonment within her own fortress at Chaktice. The popular, most dramatic version of her confinement suggests that stonemasons literally walled up her bedchamber, leaving only narrow slits for food and air. It's an image of absolute suffocating isolation, a living tomb. This chilling image of the bricked-up room has been widely propagated, contributing to the grim mystique surrounding her. However, historical documents offer a slightly less dramatic, though still harsh reality. While György Thurzo himself claimed she was locked in a bricked room, other documents from visits by priests in July 1614 suggest that she was actually able to move relatively unhindered within the castle, albeit under strict house arrest. She was certainly confined to the castle, never permitted to leave, but perhaps not in the claustrophobic, bricked-up cell that the legend describes. She even had her servants and lived in the luxurious lifestyle she was used to, albeit a confined one. Regardless of the exact details of her physical confinement, her fate was sealed. She lived that way for 4 years, a prisoner in her own home, until guards found her face down on the floor in August 1614 at the age of 54. Reportedly, she left a last letter, a final plea, proclaiming her innocence and asking to be buried next to her beloved family. Even in death, the authorities couldn't resist adding a touch of drama and ensuring her legacy remained tainted. She was initially buried in the local churchyard, but villagers soon claimed that her grave glowed at night or that her presence was somehow disturbing the peace. Whether this was genuine fear or another orchestrated rumor to further demonize her, the result was the same. Her remains were quietly moved. No tombstone marks the spot today. Her final resting place remains a mystery, another layer of silence added to her story. In many ways, the physical walling up, whether literal or metaphorical, mirrors the historical silencing of Elizabeth Bathory. The message was clear: lock her away, seal the records, discredit her name, and let rumor and sensationalism do the rest. Her voice was silenced, her side of the story buried under layers of accusation and political convenience. The lack of a marked grave serves as a chilling coda to a life that was forcibly erased from the public sphere, leaving only the monstrous legend in its wake. Chapter 7. Why the bloodbath myth won't die. The bloodbath story isn't supported by contemporary evidence. It first appeared in print more than a century after her death. Yet, it's the one detail everyone remembers, the gruesome image that has made her infamous. Why is this particular myth so incredibly sticky? Why won't it just die? Well, 17th century Europe loved a good scary story almost as much as we love binge-watching true crime documentaries on Netflix today. The printing press, a relatively new technology, was a powerful tool for spreading information and misinformation. Pamphleteers, always eager to sell their wares, printed sensational tracts with titles like The Hungarian Jezebel and Tigress of the Habsburgs. Each new publication tried to be more inventive, more lurid, and more shocking than the last. These early forms of tabloid journalism were instrumental in crafting Bathory's monstrous image. A century later, in 1729, French writer Pierre Prosper de Barante added the now iconic cosmetic twist. He introduced the idea that Elizabeth supposedly noticed that the spot where a servant's blood splashed her hand looked younger. And just like that, bam, instant fountain of youth trope. This detail was pure fiction, a literary embellishment, but it resonated deeply. It tapped into universal human desires for eternal youth and beauty, and it provided a logical, if twisted, motivation for her alleged cruelty that was easy to grasp. This specific element transformed her from merely a cruel noblewoman into something far more Gothic and fantastical. By the 19th century, with the rise of Gothic literature and a burgeoning fascination with the supernatural, poets and painters began to fuse Elizabeth Bathory's story with the growing lore of vampirism. This was happening just as Bram Stoker was penning Dracula back home in Dublin, drawing on various Eastern European legends. Though there's no direct evidence Stoker used Bathory as a direct inspiration, the cultural currents were certainly flowing in that direction, linking powerful, aristocratic figures with bloodlust and immortality. Pop culture, then, sealed the deal. The image of the Blood Countess became a shorthand for ultimate evil, a female counterpoint to Dracula. Her story has been endlessly reinterpreted, adapted, and sensationalized across various media. Today, you can find everything from Bathory bath bombs, the irony, and black metal albums, to Czech black comedy musicals and countless horror films inspired by her legend. The bloodbath image is lurid, compact, and utterly unforgettable. It's a powerful narrative, a perfect piece of macabre theater that captures the imagination. It reduces a complex historical figure and a tangled political conspiracy into a simple, terrifying motif. And because it's so compelling, so viscerally shocking, it survives and thrives, even though the original court records, the actual historical documents, never mention it. It's a testament to the power of a good, horrifying story, even when it's mostly fiction. Chapter 8. The numbers don't add up. The sheer scale of Elizabeth Bathory's alleged crimes is often what makes her story so horrifying. 600 victims, 650. It's a number that's etched into the legend, making her the most prolific female serial killer in history. But when you actually dig into the historical evidence, those numbers start to crumble, revealing a very different picture. Historians now believe the real victim count, if any, is somewhere far lower, perhaps between 36 and 80, not 650. That's still horrific, don't get me wrong, but it's a massive difference. So where did that staggering number of 650 come from? It boils down to a single scrap of paper. One witness, a servant named Susanna, claimed to have seen a private book belonging to Bathory, where her court official, Jakub Szilvasi, had allegedly recorded the names of 650 victims. This note, supposedly in Elizabeth's own handwriting saying, 650 girls have passed through my estates, became the cornerstone of the inflated victim count. But here's the problem, and it's a big one. This crucial evidence surfaced years after the trial of the servants, not during the main investigation. And crucially, handwriting analysis has never conclusively tied it to Elizabeth Bathory. Furthermore, the court official who supposedly saw this list, Jakub Szilvasi, never testified in court. So, we have a second-hand account of a supposed list, which itself is unverified and appeared late in the game. That's hardly concrete evidence, is it? Let's apply a little historical common sense. The Kingdom of Hungary at the time was sparsely populated. Losing 600 or 650 teenage girls from a relatively small population would have been an economic catastrophe. Imagine the impact on local communities, on families, on the labor force. Such a massive disappearance would have triggered widespread chaos, a significant dip in able-bodied workers, and an outcry that would have been impossible to ignore for decades. Yet, tax rolls from the period don't show any noticeable dip in the numbers of available workers. Parish registers don't reveal a surge in missing person reports. The kind of sustained mass disappearances implied by the 650 figure simply don't align with the demographic and economic realities of early 17th century Hungary. Compare this to a contemporary figure, Gilles de Rais, a French noble executed for child murders in the 15th century. In his case, court records list more than 140 confirmed victims with clear evidence and detailed accounts. De Rais is remembered as a monster, but his victim count, though substantial, is far less than Bathory's alleged numbers. Elizabeth Bathory's official file, by contrast, is far thinner on verifiable victims, yet she's remembered as the bigger monster. Why? Because, as it often goes in sensationalized history, the bigger the body count, the juicier the legend. And conveniently, the easier it is to justify seizing a vast fortune and dismantling a powerful family. The exaggerated numbers served a clear purpose, both in fueling the myth and in providing a compelling reason for her downfall. Chapter 9. Gender, Power, and the Witch Label. The story of Elizabeth Bathory isn't just about a potential serial killer or a political conspiracy. It's also a stark reminder of how early modern Europe treated powerful women. This era had a deeply ingrained playbook for dealing with women who dared to wield authority, manage wealth, or simply exist outside traditional patriarchal norms. Call them witches. From Joan of Arc, burned at the stake for heresy and witchcraft, to thousands of forgotten midwives and healers accused of sorcery, accusations of witchcraft often masked deeper political, social, or economic motives. It was a convenient, potent weapon against women who were perceived as threatening or unruly. Elizabeth Bathory fit this profile perfectly. She ran vast estates, negotiated loans, and commanded a household of hundreds, all while being a woman. In a society where women were largely excluded from public life and positions of power, this alone raised eyebrows and generated suspicion. Her independent wealth and influence, especially after her husband's death, made her an anomaly, a woman too rich to control, too female to trust, and too visible to ignore. Add whispers of torture and murder, and you've got the perfect storm for a demonization campaign. Some scholars argue that the entire case against Bathory reflects what's known as gendered violence by proxy. Instead of directly attacking the Countess, which would have been scandalous and potentially destabilizing to the nobility, authorities prosecuted her female servants. These women, often from lower social strata, were easier targets. Punishing them served as a warning, a way to indirectly control or punish their mistress's ambition and alleged transgressions. It was a message sent through the bodies of less powerful women. The historical context of witch trials in Hungary further illuminates this point. While witch hunts in Hungary became more intense in the late 16th century, they were still ongoing in the 17th century. Women, particularly those who were elderly, poor, or challenged social norms, were disproportionately accused. Although witchcraft was never considered a crimen acceptum, an accepted crime, in Hungary and was punished alongside other offenses, the underlying societal anxieties about female power remained. Elizabeth Bathory, with her immense power and alleged dark deeds, could easily be folded into this narrative of female malevolence. Sound familiar? 4 centuries later, powerful women still face higher scrutiny. They're subjected to different standards, often labeled with disparaging terms, witches, monsters, nasty, when they assert authority or challenge the status quo. Elizabeth Bathory's story is an early, bloody warning of what can happen when ambition, wealth, and female autonomy collide with a deeply entrenched patriarchy that fears and seeks to control women who step out of line. It's a chilling historical echo that resonates even today. Chapter 10. Modern verdicts. So, after all this digging, what's the modern verdict on Elizabeth Bathory? Guilty as charged, or a victim of a ruthless political frame-up? The truth, as is often the case with complex historical figures, is probably far messier than either extreme. Different narratives persist even today. In Hungary's national curriculum, she's often still listed as a cruel aristocrat who got what she deserved, a cautionary tale of unchecked power and sadism. Slovak tour guides, especially those eager to attract tourists to Chaktica Castle, sometimes paint her as the region's first feminist martyr, a powerful woman brought down by envious men. Academic consensus, however, tends to lean toward a more nuanced middle path. Most historians agree that she probably did abuse her servants. Corporal punishment, harsh treatment, and even extreme violence against those of lower social status were, regrettably, not uncommon practices among the nobility in early modern Europe. The idea that she was entirely innocent of any wrongdoing is difficult to reconcile with the sheer volume of witness testimonies, even accounting for their flaws. However, the consensus also strongly suggests that the scale of her alleged crimes, especially the inflated numbers of victims and the sensational bloodbathing, was significantly amplified. This amplification served a clear purpose: to justify a massive land grab and to neutralize a powerful political figure without the scandal of a noble trial. The political and financial motives are too transparent to ignore. Without a public trial for Elizabeth Bathory herself, we'll never truly know the full, unvarnished truth. The legal process was deliberately circumvented to avoid public disgrace for the nobility and to facilitate the confiscation of her assets. The decision to confine her rather than execute her, which would have meant the crown seizing all her property, was a compromise. It allowed her family to retain control of her wealth, albeit under the management of others, while still removing her from the picture. What we do know, with historical certainty, is this: King Matthias II cleared his substantial debt. Georgi Thurzo gained control of her castles and lands, expanding his own power and influence. The Bathory family, though retaining some property, never fully regained its former political clout after the scandal. Mission accomplished, wouldn't you say? The machinery of power worked exactly as intended, achieving its objectives under the guise of justice. There's even a fascinating, though less mainstream, theory that challenges the entire premise of her sadism. Some historians suggest that Bathory might have been involved in early forms of medical science, or that her victims were actually tenants receiving treatment on her land. This theory proposes that the descriptions of torture might correspond to contemporary medical procedures, and that her lists of victims could have been records of people under her care. While this remains a fringe interpretation, it highlights how much room for reinterpretation exists when the historical record is incomplete and politically charged. Conclusion: you decide. So, where do we land on Elizabeth Bathory? Was she a sadistic killer who tortured for pleasure, a monster in human form who prefigured the most chilling villains of horror fiction? Or was she a wealthy, independently powerful widow, railroaded by greedy, politically motivated men who saw her as an obstacle and an opportunity? History, in this case, hands us a mix of smoke and mirrors instead of a smoking gun. The hard evidence of mass murder is surprisingly thin, especially for the numbers widely cited. The political and financial incentives for her downfall are glaringly obvious. Perhaps she was both. A harsh mistress, certainly, whose authority and independent wealth threatened a kingdom and a patriarchal social order, and whose actions, however exaggerated, provided the perfect pretext for her destruction. Either way, the next time you hear someone cite 650 victims or tell the lurid tale of the bloodbaths, remember the earliest sources don't support it. Remember the context: a powerful woman, a king in debt, ambitious nobles, and a society quick to condemn female agency. Question the legend, follow the money, and think twice before you buy the next vampire brand face cream. Now, I want to hear your take. What's your verdict on Elizabeth Bathory, monster, martyr, or something far messier in between? Drop your verdict in the comments below, Smash that like button if you want more historical deep dives that challenge the myths, and subscribe for stories that scrape the rust off the past and reveal the complicated truths beneath.